The sleek black car hummed down the winding road, its dark exterior reflecting the golden hues of the morning sun. Johnny Depp sat in the back seat, his fingers absently tracing the worn leather of the armrest. Outside, the opulent homes of Silvercrest Estates, a neighborhood known for its old money charm and lush surroundings, lined the streets. It had been years since Johnny had spent more than a fleeting moment in any one place. Between film sets and public appearances, his life had been a whirlwind of movement. But now, he was seeking solace, a fresh start. Johnny adjusted his sunglasses, letting the cool morning breeze ruffle his hair as the driver lowered the windows at his signal. The villa ahead was his, a property he had purchased on a whim years ago but never inhabited. It had been rented out to various tenants, a distant asset managed by professionals. Now, it was meant to be his retreat, a place to reconnect with himself and, perhaps, rediscover a simpler rhythm of life. The car slowed as it approached an ornate wrought iron gate that opened with a quiet whir. The property stretched out before him, a Mediterranean-style villa with sunlit terracotta roofs and cascading ivy adorning its walls. The driver brought the car to a gentle stop, and Johnny stepped out, taking in the full splendor of his surroundings. The air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and the faint sweetness of nearby jasmine. "Good morning, Mr. Depp," said a poised, silver-haired man as he approached. He wore a sharp uniform and carried himself with the dignity of someone well-versed in the service industry. "I'm Charles, your butler. The household staff has ensured the villa is in immaculate condition for your arrival." "Thank you, Charles," Johnny replied, his voice rich with gratitude. "It's nice to finally see this place with my own eyes. I'd like to take a stroll around before settling in." "Of course, sir," Charles replied with a polite nod. "The staff will see to your belongings." Johnny set off down the private lane that meandered through his property. The trees whispered in the gentle breeze, their leaves casting dappled shadows on the ground. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the frenetic energy of Hollywood. But as he neared the gates leading out to the neighborhood, the sound of a sharp bark punctured the quiet, a single, desperate cry that carried with it a note of pain. Instinctively, Johnny's eyes darted toward the source of the sound. Just beyond the gate, on the sidewalk, a tall man in a tailored tracksuit yanked harshly at the leash of a trembling golden retriever mix. The dog, a lean creature with soulful brown eyes, cowered under the man's gaze. The man's face twisted in anger as he muttered something unintelligible, yanking the leash again. The movement was so violent that the dog stumbled, letting out another sharp yelp. Johnny's heart clenched. He pushed open the gate, stepping onto the sidewalk. The man noticed him immediately, his face morphing into a mask of polished charm. "Well, hello there," the man said, extending a hand. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Gregory Whitmore." Johnny hesitated before shaking the man's hand, his gaze fixed on the trembling dog. "Johnny," he said simply. "Is everything all right with your dog? He seems skittish." Gregory's smile widened, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, Rusty. He's fine. Just a bit of a handful sometimes, you know how rescues are. But we're working on him." Johnny crouched, extending a hand toward the dog. Rusty hesitated but leaned forward to sniff, his movements slow and cautious. Johnny could see the raw, red patches on the dog's fur and the gauntness of his frame. "Looks like he's been through a lot," Johnny said softly, his voice tinged with concern. "Have you taken him to the vet recently?" Gregory's smile faltered. "Of course," he said, waving the question off. "Anyway, welcome to the neighborhood. We're having a community event tomorrow, a barbecue at my place. You should come. It'll give you a chance to meet everyone." Johnny stood, his eyes lingering on Rusty. "Thanks for the invitation," he replied noncommittally. "I'll think about it." Gregory tugged on the leash. "See you around, then," he said, his tone light. But as he turned to walk away, Johnny couldn't ignore the way Rusty flinched with every step. That evening, as Johnny unpacked in his villa, he couldn't shake the image of Rusty's frightened eyes. It gnawed at him, a silent plea he couldn't ignore. This was supposed to be his refuge, but already, a moral dilemma had found him. Something wasn't right about Gregory, and Johnny knew he couldn't look the other way. The next morning, Johnny Depp sat at the small writing desk in his villa, staring out at the sun-drenched courtyard. His mind, however, wasn't on the tranquil scenery. The image of Rusty's trembling form lingered in his thoughts like a haunting melody. Something had to be done. He picked up his phone and dialed the number of an old friend, Dr. Lila Grant, a renowned veterinarian and animal behavior specialist. "Johnny," Lila greeted warmly. "It's been ages. What's the occasion?" "Lila," Johnny began, his tone heavy with concern. "I've moved into this place in Silvercrest, and I think I've stumbled on something troubling. There's a dog here, a rescue, they say, but he looks malnourished and terrified. His owner seems off." Lila's tone shifted, the warmth giving way to professionalism. "Do you think the dog is in danger?" "I do," Johnny said firmly. "I need to know how to handle this. I can't just let it slide." "Well," Lila said thoughtfully, "start by documenting everything, photos, videos, dates, times. If you suspect neglect or abuse, you'll need evidence. And try to be subtle, you don't want to tip the owner off." Johnny nodded, making a mental note. "Thanks, Lila. I'll be in touch." Hanging up, Johnny felt a sense of purpose settle over him. The barbecue at Gregory's house that afternoon would be the perfect opportunity to observe and gather information. He dressed casually but sharply, blending into the upscale but relaxed vibe of the neighborhood. Gregory's sprawling backyard was a hive of activity when Johnny arrived. String lights hung from trees, children chased each other across the lawn, and a gourmet grill sizzled in the center of the festivities. Gregory was holding court near the grill, his booming laugh echoing over the chatter of the guests. "Johnny!" Gregory called out as he approached. "Glad you could make it." Johnny forced a polite smile. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. His eyes flicked around the yard, searching. "Where's Rusty?" Gregory waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, he's resting. Not much of a party animal." Johnny's smile tightened. "Shame. I was hoping to see him." Gregory raised an eyebrow, his polished facade slipping for a moment before he recovered. "Maybe later," he said breezily, steering Johnny toward a group of guests. "Let me introduce you to some of the neighbors." Johnny endured the pleasantries, keeping his tone polite but his senses sharp. Between handshakes and small talk, he scanned the property. Finally, near the edge of the yard, he spotted a row of ornamental shrubs that looked deliberately placed to block the view of something beyond. Excusing himself, he wandered toward them, careful not to draw attention. As he rounded the corner, his heart sank. There, tied to a pole in a secluded area, was Rusty. The dog's ribs were painfully visible, his fur matted and patchy. A small, empty water bowl sat beside him, and his leash was tangled, restricting his movements. Rusty's eyes widened when he saw Johnny, but the dog didn't bark, he only whimpered softly, his tail tucked tightly between his legs. Johnny crouched down, his voice soft and soothing. "Hey, buddy," he murmured. "It's okay. I'm here." Rusty took a hesitant step forward, then froze, as if expecting punishment. Johnny's chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow. He pulled out his phone, snapping photos and recording a short video of the scene. Rusty flinched at the sound of the shutter, and Johnny cursed under his breath. "It's all right," Johnny said again, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small piece of grilled chicken he'd taken from the barbecue. Rusty sniffed the air, his hunger overriding his fear, and cautiously took the food from Johnny's hand. As Johnny stroked Rusty's head gently, the sound of footsteps behind him made him freeze. He stood and turned to see Gregory striding toward him, his face a mask of feigned surprise. "Johnny," Gregory said, his tone clipped. "What are you doing back here?" "I was looking for Rusty," Johnny said evenly, keeping his tone light. "Wanted to see how he's doing." Gregory's smile was tight, his eyes hard. "He's fine. Like I said, he's a rescue, takes time to adjust. You know how it is." Johnny held Gregory's gaze, his instincts screaming that the man was lying. "Doesn't look like he's adjusting well," Johnny said, gesturing to the tangled leash and empty bowl. "You sure he's getting what he needs?" Gregory's face darkened, his polite veneer slipping further. "Look," he said sharply, "I don't appreciate being judged in my own home. Rusty's my dog, and I'll take care of him as I see fit." Johnny raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough. Just making sure he's all right." Gregory huffed, his irritation evident. "Well, if you're done playing animal activist, the party's that way." He gestured back toward the yard before storming off. Johnny knelt beside Rusty once more, whispering, "I'm not done, buddy. Not by a long shot." That night, Johnny reviewed the photos and videos he'd taken, uploading them to a secure drive. He reached out to Lila again, describing what he'd seen and sharing the evidence. "This is serious, Johnny," Lila said after reviewing the files. "Rusty's condition is worse than I imagined. You need to report this to animal control." "I will," Johnny promised. "But I want to make sure Rusty's safe first. I don't trust Gregory not to cover his tracks if he gets wind of this." Lila hesitated. "Be careful, Johnny. People like Gregory don't take kindly to being exposed." "I can handle Gregory," Johnny said, his voice steady. "Rusty deserves better than this." The next morning, Johnny Depp sat in the kitchen of his villa, sipping a strong cup of coffee. His mind was already buzzing with the plan he had spent the night piecing together. Rusty couldn't stay with Gregory any longer, not after what Johnny had seen. But exposing Gregory wouldn't be enough, Johnny needed to ensure Rusty's safety first. He made a call to a local animal rescue organization, explaining the situation and sharing the evidence he had gathered. The director, a compassionate woman named Amelia, assured Johnny that her team would be ready to intervene if Rusty could be brought to them. After ending the call, Johnny turned to Charles, his butler, who had been discreetly helping him coordinate the rescue. "Charles," Johnny said, his voice calm but resolute. "I need you to do something for me. Call Gregory and invite him over for a drink this evening. Tell him I want to clear the air after yesterday." Charles arched an eyebrow, understanding the subtext. "And while he's here?" "I'll get Rusty out," Johnny replied simply. That evening, Gregory arrived at Johnny's villa, his confidence restored after the tense encounter at the barbecue. He sauntered in, a glass of scotch in hand within moments, and launched into a monologue about his latest business ventures. Johnny nodded along, his attention only half on the conversation. His real focus was on the villa's security cameras, which displayed the live feed from Gregory's property. On the screen, Johnny saw Charles's assistant, a young and athletic man named Marco, moving quickly and quietly through Gregory's backyard. Marco approached the secluded area where Rusty was tied, carefully untangling the leash and freeing the trembling dog. Rusty hesitated for a moment, unsure of the sudden kindness, but eventually allowed Marco to scoop him up and carry him toward Johnny's car waiting outside the gate. Back in the living room, Johnny kept Gregory distracted, steering the conversation toward the neighborhood's upcoming charity gala. "I hear you're the chair this year," Johnny said smoothly, raising his glass. "Quite the honor." "Of course," Gregory replied, puffing out his chest. "It's important to maintain one's standing in the community. People look up to me, you know." Johnny smiled tightly, suppressing the urge to call out Gregory's hypocrisy. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a single text from Marco, got him. Johnny's shoulders relaxed slightly, though he maintained his facade of polite interest. He poured Gregory another drink, ensuring the man wouldn't leave before Marco and Rusty were safely away. An hour later, Gregory finally departed, none the wiser about what had transpired. Johnny wasted no time. He drove directly to the animal rescue center, where Amelia and her team were waiting. Rusty was already there, lying on a soft bed and surrounded by bowls of fresh food and water. Amelia was crouched beside him, gently examining his injuries. "He's in rough shape," Amelia said as Johnny approached. "But he's resilient. With time and proper care, he'll recover." Johnny knelt beside Rusty, his hand resting lightly on the dog's head. "You're safe now," he whispered. "No one's ever going to hurt you again." Rusty wagged his tail faintly, a small but hopeful sign. The next day, Johnny filed a formal report with the local authorities, backed by the evidence he had gathered and statements from Amelia's team. The rescue center also issued a public statement, sparking outrage in the community. Neighbors who had long ignored Gregory's behavior now found themselves questioning their silence. The media caught wind of the story, and it quickly gained traction. Gregory's carefully curated image of respectability crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Sponsors withdrew their support from his ventures, and his position as chair of the charity gala was rescinded. Legal proceedings for animal cruelty began shortly after. Rusty, meanwhile, thrived under Amelia's care. Johnny visited him often, bringing toys and treats and marveling at the dog's transformation. The once frightened animal grew stronger and more confident with each passing day. A few weeks later, Johnny sat on the steps of the rescue center with Rusty by his side. The dog's coat was glossy, his eyes bright with life. A family approached, a couple with 2 young children, all smiling warmly. "This is the family I told you about," Amelia said, introducing them to Johnny. "They've been looking for a dog to adopt, and they fell in love with Rusty's story." Johnny crouched beside Rusty, scratching behind his ears. "What do you think, buddy? Ready for a new chapter?" Rusty licked Johnny's hand, his tail wagging furiously. Johnny smiled, standing to shake hands with the family. As he watched Rusty trot off with his new family, Johnny felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had come to Silvercrest seeking peace, but what he found was something far more meaningful, a chance to make a difference. Walking back to his villa, Johnny reflected on the journey. Rusty's rescue had exposed not only Gregory's cruelty but also the apathy that allowed it to continue. It was a reminder that even in the most picturesque places, darkness could lurk, and that standing up against it could spark real change. And so, Johnny's quiet retreat became a story of courage and compassion, one that would be retold by neighbors and media alike. But for Johnny, the true victory lay in Rusty's wagging tail and the knowledge that, for one innocent soul, the world had become a kinder place.